Over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Dharma Breeze. Tonight we'll start with a silent meditation. So if you could please sit in your chair, sit erect, and put your feet flat on the floor and try to relax your shoulders, please. Please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namadats, namadats. So tonight we're going to be chanting the Jusei. So if you can please join me, that will be on page 55 in the red service book or in the PDF. Gagon chosegan ishi mujodo shigan fumanzok sefu joshogak gao muryoko Dai se shu, sai shobingu, se fu jo shogak, gashi jobundo, myosho chojipo, kukyo mishomon sefu joshogak ryoku jinshonen joe shubongyo shigumu jodo isho tenninshi jinniki endai ko busho musaido shoujo sankumyo kosai shuyakunan Kaihi chiegen meshi komoan esoku shoakudo sudatsu zenshumon koso jomanzok Iorojipo 月主寿期天候不減一種解放像公正功徳法上大衆寿説法四式供養一切物具足習徳本元年出場満得意三害用如仏無下知通達未不詳願学営力投資最小損志願若国家大仙大感動国書天人東地妙慶ナマダブナマダブナマダブナマダブナマダブナマダブ願にしく読平等正祭同壺大神往生Namadats, namadats, 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 namadats. Good evening, everyone, and welcome from a very warm Manhattan this evening. One of the things about returning to the East Coast after being gone for over 10 years is I forgot the weather, what it's like here. And so I am perspiring, so please forgive me if I'm dabbing my forehead. I don't want to, it's very warm. It's about 85 degrees in my apartment. And I have to figure out how we're going to do the services for me because I have just an air conditioning unit in the window that makes a lot of noise. So I'm going to have to do some technical adjustments to figure out how I'm going to be doing the services here for on the Wednesday service at night. So I might have to actually go to another room to be able to do that. So, but welcome. Tonight, I want to bring up kind of a very personal subject matter for the Dharma talk. When I'm sitting down and writing Dharma talks, times that sometimes you feel comfortable with the subject matter, sometimes you don't feel comfortable with the subject matter. And tonight's subject matter I'm going to be talking about is how to deal with our emotion of anger and how do we deal with anger from a Buddhist perspective. And the reason that it's a little difficult for me to talk about anger is that, unfortunately, I have that disposition that I inherited from my mother's side of the family, as she would always point out, is that I can get very angry very quickly. And it's something that I'm not particularly proud about. And I'll tell you a story. So my brother is 8 years older than myself. And so he has a lot of memories of when I was very young that I don't remember. And my mother, my nickname when I was a little boy, actually was Fang, because I was such a little monster running around. It's kind of funny saying that as a Buddhist minister now, but I was called Fang. And my mom said that she was worried about me getting into trouble until I could start speaking. So I was one of those toddlers that was just really emotional and got very angry very easily. And then when I was able to start communicating, then the temper went down. But that unfortunately, that disposition is something that I've carried into adulthood. And for me, anger is something that is embarrassing, because for me, something happens or causes and conditions happen, and then all of a sudden it builds up in myself and I get really angry. And I have to be careful not to say things or to hurt people's feelings. And this is something that I'm very grateful that as a Buddhist that I'm able to reflect upon with the Buddhist teachings. So for tonight, one of the things is that brought this up is that as I moved from Fresno, and a lot of you that followed me when I was working on Sundays at Ekoji as the virtual minister, a lot of my stories about moving and getting rid of my books and furniture falling apart and things being thrown away and all the stresses that were involved with that. But the long-term event is that I moved in September and now it is May, and I finally have the house completed with repair work and someone has moved in and rented it. So it's been a stressor for me, both psychologically and financially, that my house has just been sitting in Fresno. And as we know, with the current situation, especially in California and especially in Fresno, I was worried I was going to have a squatter move into the house. And so I have a property maintenance management company that is supervising the house, and I finally have someone moving in. Now, when I was thinking about that, and then when I signed the contract, I just sighed this big sigh of relief. It's like, okay, I finally have someone moving in. They're going to take care of the property. But it reminded me of what happened when I got transferred to Ekoji 10 years ago. It was a very quick move again, from California to Virginia. And so I had the house. This is a house that I'm purchasing. And so I tried to sell the house and it did not work out. And so I moved to Ekoji and the house was empty. And I was very concerned about the house at that time as well as currently. And so one day I'd been in Ekoji for about 4 months. I was focusing on Obonodori actually. It was about this time of the year. And so my mind was everything except for the house in Fresno. And I got a call from the management company, and somebody had broken into the house. They had taken all the light fixtures. They had stolen the washer and dryer. They had done some vandalism. And I received this phone call after work in the evening. And of course, they're on West Coast time, so it's easy for them to not realize that they're calling me, after work. And I was so taken aback by how quickly my anger just blew up. And we can understand that it's justified. One of the things that we'll be talking about tonight with the viewpoint from a Buddhist perspective, and we're going to talk specifically about Thich Nhat Hanh, whose book he wrote on anger, which is actually a bestseller on the New York Times list many years ago, is that it's easy for us to focus on the anger itself and to justify it and to not let it go. So on the surface, I was very justified because someone had broken into my house, someone had stolen things and caused damage. And part of it is that when I had moved, one of the reasons that I moved to Ekoji is that my father had been living with me, who, bless his heart, was 90 years old, and he passed away. And the house was very special to him. So the house is a 1938 Mediterranean bungalow. I never thought I'd have a house like this. It's like one of those fantasy houses. It's got the red tile roofs, and it's got the tile floor. And it was built in 1938. And my dad, when he moved in, he goes, "This is not a house, this is a home." And he goes, 1938 is a good year. That's the year I graduated from high school. I'm like, okay, Dad. So Dad loved the house. And so part of my frustration and anger was not just over monetary aspects, is that I felt violated, that here is the home that I shared with my father until he passed away. He loved it, I loved it, and somebody came in and had done these acts of violence and vandalism. One of the nice things for you to know is that I lived in the house again 8 years later, and there was not as much vandalism as I had anticipated originally. But that night, when I got the information, I could not sleep. I was tossing and turning. And it's one of those situations where the anger is so palpable. You feel it's a physiological reaction to it. I could not sleep. I was tossing and turning, and my mind was just going over and over and over. And I remember getting up and going in front of the Obutsudan and saying the Nembutsu, and it just was not able to cure that fire. And when we talk about emotions, we do talk about them in a very passionate way. And with anger, especially, it is a fire. And then that's one of the metaphors that they talk about in Buddhism a lot. It's this fire that how do you extinguish that flame? And how do you not keep increasing it? Because as we all know, if you're not skillful, again, getting back to like I could blame everything on the people that robbed me. But the idea is like, well, why am I so upset? What is the situation going on with Kurt that is not following through with why I'm getting angrier and angrier instead of trying to dissipate that? So, so one of the things that I did as a Buddhist, I had remembered that I had a period where I was actually living at as I've mentioned before, when I went to the Institute of Buddhist Studies, I lived in the dormitory, and I lived with both a Theravadan monk and a Zen nun from Korea. And so it was stressful living with people that are from the monastic background. And especially I had a confrontation with the Zen woman from Korea. So she, for example, I was the dorm manager, and she was very frustrated with how the situation was in the dorm. People were cooking meat, and she says, I know I shouldn't be judgmental about that, but can you do something about that? And so, like, for example, in her bedroom, one of the rules of the 108 rules of the monastery is that you don't sleep on a bed that's risen above the floor. So she had disassembled her bed, and she's sleeping on the floor. And she was getting more and more agitated. And I did not personalize that it was me that she was angry with. It was, I think, living in a secular situation. And I think I've mentioned this before. I had a lot of empathy for her because all she said, because she was very intelligent. And so the head organization in Korea decided that they're going to send her to get her PhD so they could start doing academic Buddhism in Korea, like that has been done in Japan for over 100 years. And so they sent her to the Institute of Buddhist Studies to get her PhD. And she said to me at the breakfast table, Kurt, all I want to do is I want to go back to the temple. I just want to go back to the temple. She didn't want all the responsibilities. She didn't like leading the secular life. The world was hard for her. I mean, she would come home and I saw her crying, and I said, what's wrong, Dong Ho? Because that's kind of like a generic name like Bante. And she says, Americans are so cruel. There's homeless people on the streets. And she just was not used to, the everyday life that we're all exposed to. But long story short, so at that period of time, she got very upset with me. And I did not know what to do because I was the dorm manager and we're living together. I mean, obviously not in the same room, but it was like 14 rooms in the dormitory. And so what she did is that we did a peace agreement. And what I'm bringing this up for is, ironically, this peace agreement is a part of the Thich Nhat Hanh book that I'm going to be discussing. That in the appendix in the back, he's got like a relaxation meditation. He's got, and one of the things is this peace agreement. And so what it does is you sit down with a person, and it's a contract where you say that I understand that that this other person's upset with me, but I'm not going to try to correct their view. And I'm not going to go into great detail about this, but I got this from the Thich Nhat Hanh book about his anger. Wisdom for Cooling the Flames is the name of the book. The book is, I believe 20 years old now. And so I went through that experience with her. So we sat down and we wrote this contract, and we actually put it in a frame and put it on the wall to try to abide that we would both be able to carry on and get through this period where she was not myself, unfortunately, but for her, she was very angry with me. So that book, okay, so I said, well, where did you get this contract from? And she said, Thich Nhat Hanh wrote this book about anger, and you might want to read it. And again, this is a book that I picked up, again, 10 years ago when I was at Ekoji, when I had this really visceral anger that I could not control about my house being violated, about the financial situation and being, and honestly, I think a lot of us realize that when we get angry, a lot of it is the idea of our control. How much control do we have in our life? And here I'm in Virginia, all these situations are going on in California, and I literally did not have control over it. And how do you process that? So Thich Nhat Hanh, as many of you are well aware of, was a world famous Zen practitioner from Vietnam. who was no longer allowed to live in his homeland because of anti-Vietnam War protests, and he created the Plum Village community, which was based in France, but is also world-based. And if you look at a lot of the Buddhist publications that are done today, like Shambhala Sun and Tricycle, his Sangha is very large and very influential, and also, interestingly enough, non-traditional. You've got a lot of American-born people that are following this tradition. As I've said to someone that's in the meeting tonight, which I won't mention by name, we had a wonderful conversation, and this person thought Thich Nhat Hanh was an excellent writer. And I agree, for someone that English is not the first language for this person, the way that he writes is very eloquent. It's not necessarily the most perfect English, but the way he expresses things is wonderful. And Reverend Castro is somebody that introduced me to Thich Nhat Hanh many, many years ago. But what he talks about at the beginning of this book, and the book is based on anger, like I said, it's called Anger, Wisdom of Cooling the Flames. And what he talks about is he talks about the idea or the concept of happiness. And the idea of happiness is that when we talk about happiness is we're wanting it to be non-confrontational, we're wanting things to go smoothly. And he says in this book, in the preface, he says that the idea is that most people look for these things outside of themselves. So the idea is that happiness is freedom. And as I mentioned last week, we have to be careful with our choice of words. And so Thich Nhat Hanh uses the word as freedom, and the freedom is from such things as anger, despair, jealousy, these types of concepts, which are part of our psychic break, part of our construct of who we are, is something that is kind of the negative side, if you want to put it in dualistic terms. And how do we get through this? And he says, happiness is freedom from these ailments. Looking at it in a very traditional Buddhist viewpoint, as like Shakyamuni did as a physician, is like, okay, this is the symptom. What do we do to remedy this idea of anger and despair? And so the part, again, as I was at Seabrook this last weekend, which is always a great experience because the Seabrook Sangha literally is in the countryside. And so when I meet the Sangha members, I did a crossing over seminar, which is a seminar which introduces people from different religious or spiritual backgrounds to what Buddhism is and perhaps what Shin Buddhism could be for them. And I had a good group of about 15 people, most of them, several of them not having any experience with Buddhism. And they would ask very basic questions. It's like, well, how do you deal with sadness? How do you deal with death? They didn't say, how do you deal with anger? But this is like the general type of emotional components that the Buddha would talk about and that Thich Nhat Hanh talked about in this book. And as I said in that seminar, one of the things that I appreciate about the Buddhist teachings or the Dharma is that in our everyday life, we tend to externalize things. With anger, it's like, well, why is this person making me angry? Why is this situation making me angry? Why is my job making me angry? Whereas in Buddhism, we're supposed to be self-reflective. And so the idea is like, what is it that is my personality? What is it that is either conscious or unconscious that is being triggered by these external events? And that's how Thich Nhat Hanh talks about in the book. As I said, if you do read the book, and it's a great book, and you can get it inexpensively if you want to use a copy of it, on Amazon. And he breaks down these different practices that you can do. But basically, the rationalization is that as Buddhists, we need to be self-reflective. And instead of focusing on the anger itself, is to focus on what is our perspective that is causing us to interact with the anger. Now, that seems very simple to put it that bluntly, but in reality, I think all of us, and myself, especially in the situation when I'm talking about my house being violated and things being stolen, it's so easy to focus on the concrete aspect of why I'm angry. Why am I justified to be angry? What are the circumstances? Well, instead of pulling back and saying, what are the triggers? What are the situations? And I think for myself, with when I did this reflection with Thich Nhat Hanh's book at Ekoji 10 years ago, one of the things that came out is that for myself, I realized that I felt violated, that the house was more than just a piece of property. This was my first home that I ever owned. I shared it with my father. My father passed away in the house, which was a good thing. He passed away in his sleep, but it was very important. That house to this day is very important to me. And I felt violated. So yes, people came in and they stole. Yes, people came in and they did these impure acts, but my visceral response is twofold. One is that I was violated, and number two, I felt like I had no control. And so Thich Nhat Hanh would say, okay, so when you reflect upon this, what would you do differently? And of course, that does not mean that the anger is going to instantly go away. But what it does is it's a tool for us to move on. It's a path for us. So this time I'm angry about the house. But next time when I have a situation that causes anger, instead of reaching out, getting angry, maybe lashing out, unfortunately, verbally or however you want to do that, is that you take that moment to pause and say, what is the situation? Why is this causing me this much distress? And like I said, even though it's justified, black and white, they stole things from me. When it comes to other situations where we get angry, with a coworker, or we get angry with a family member, what is it that is pushing our buttons, so to speak, and taking responsibility for that. And so, I still have issues where I get frustrated. For example, this weekend for Memorial Day, I'm going to be going to cemeteries. And all of a sudden, yesterday, I found out there's two cemeteries instead of one. And I'm like, well, where's the other cemetery? And how do I get there? And instead of getting, I'm still frustrated. Believe me, I'm very human. But instead of getting angry about it and saying, well, why didn't someone tell me where to go? And why didn't somebody give me? It's like, no, okay, let's do this in a proactive stance. So I've reached out to the people that have done it in the past. And I think that Thich Nhat Hanh would be happy that I have followed some of the principles in the book. Instead of focusing on the anger itself, focusing for a moment on why does it react to me personally, but then to be proactive about the logistics of it. Okay, so I don't know where I'm going on Monday. I can find out where I'm going. I can Google the cemeteries. I can Google, there's two different organizations. One service is by one Japanese organization, the other's by another Japanese, and I can reach out to them. So again, I think, the beauty of Buddhism is that instead of following our anger or our emotions, is that we use them as a tool to focus on how do we get a different result from that. And Thich Nhat Hanh makes it very clear in the book is that anger is something that is natural for the human condition. We smile, we're happy. One of our minister's assistants here has a brand new grandbaby, and she sent the picture around. We're all smiling, we're all happy for her. And that's easy to do. But then when it comes to the negative emotions like anger or jealousy or hostility, is a little embarrassing for us. And so the Buddha would want us, and Thich Nhat Hanh in his excellent book points out, for us to do self-reflection. So I hope tonight that this book, maybe you can read it. Like I said, it's very readily available, both used and digital and every kind of format that you can think of. And at the end of it, even like I said earlier on, this contract, this peace contract about how somebody that you can sit down and write out a contract and talk about how you're going to work through your difficulties can be very helpful. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that we'll have a wonderful conversation about this, because anger is something that we all deal with at different times in our life, and can be something that is embarrassing, and also something that can be disruptive to our natural flow of the listening to and studying the Dharma. So if you could please join me in Gasho. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Okay, so we're going to do a group reading. And I've been focusing on our pledge a lot because I really like the meaning behind it, because it's not only self-power generated, but it's also how do I deal with these circumstances and how do I extend it to the community. And we will be increasing the reading list here in New York. We are increasing our reading list for the Sunday service, and maybe Michael and I can pick some of those that I find interesting to incorporate into our service here on Wednesday night. So if you could please join me in reading the pledge. Number 1, breaking out of my shell, I will share a warm smile and speak gentle words, just like the kind Buddha. Number 2, not becoming lost in my greed, anger, and ignorance, I shall think and act with an open mind, just like the calm and peaceful Buddha. Number 3, not putting myself first, I will share in the joy and sadness of others, just like the compassionate Buddha. Number 4, realizing the gift of life I have received, I shall strive to live each day to its fullest, like the Buddha who tirelessly works to liberate all. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Tatsu. Okay. So if everybody could please join me in another short silent meditation. So if you could put your feet squarely on the floor, relax your shoulders, and sit straight up. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Amida Butsu. Namo Tatsu.